Thanks, Doug. I forgot about the recording. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the third workshop in CDRA's closing process, and really wonderful to have Tanya Layne working with her paper today. I'm Sue Sol. I'm a former CDRA staff member. I did my workshop last time we met. And I've been part of the team that's helped pull the papers together and put the workshops on alongside Doug. There's Doug, you can see him. Doug and I are sort of hosting the workshops. Today, we're very excited to have our friend and colleague Tanya Layne presenting on her paper, Living Bureaucracy in Dark Times. And those of you who've had a chance to have a look at it will see the double meaning even in the title. And we're going to explore with Tanya some of her experience of working for a governmental organization in South Africa, and really what it is to work both in government and in bureaucracy, but from out of a holistic approach. Tanya and I have been colleagues since 2005. We first started working together when I worked for CDRA and Tanya worked for I don't even know if it was an NGO. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about it, but a funded grassroots conservation project. And over the years, we've developed a really good understanding of the rigors of working with bureaucracy, with government, with organizations that try to work at scale, but still in this holistic, responsive, developmental way. So Tanya, would you like to introduce yourself? I'm keeping an eye out for Deshni, your colleague who's going to be joining you in talking.
She's here.
Is Deshni here? Sorry, I can.
Yes, I'm here. Apologies for that.
Yeah. Hello, Deshni. Wonderful to have you. Okay, good. We've got our full panel. So we're going to get started. I'm going to ask Tanya to introduce herself, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the form of the 2 hours. And then we'll go back to our panel and start with a little bit of input. But let's start with Tanya. Tell us a bit about you before we go any further.
Thanks, Sue, for that welcome. And yeah, to CDRA that was for having me here. And maybe if I can start introducing myself by saying that when I met Sue, in 2005, I was indeed already a government employee, but you and I would never have said so. And in that sense, I guess I'm an accidental government employee. At the time, I was managing a project called Cape Flats Nature that was a grassroots initiative looking to engage people in low-income urban communities in conservation in their communities. So very unlikely, especially at the time, very unlikely participants in nature conservation activities in South Africa. And through that work, I ended up being part of the South African National Biodiversity Institute, which is a large parastatal organization responsible for science-based policy advice to government in the country. But until then, I'd been an activist working in the labor movement and in NGOs. So it really has been quite a shock to me to find myself in government. And yeah, part of what this writing reveals of me to my colleagues is some of that shock and disbelief still, many, many years later. It's nearly 20 years that I've been in SANBI or its forerunner. And yeah, the writing process has really made us think about what does it mean to be working in a bureaucracy, because and how do we bring out something that's different in the bureaucratic context. So before I talk more about that, I want to also just thank CDRA, because of those 20 years, I've now been accompanied by the practice that was seeded in CDRA, by colleagues, partners like Sue as practitioner, and Sue Davidoff and Alan Kaplan in the Proteus Initiative, and many others that are in some way or another associated by CDRA. And I couldn't have done the work that I've done over these 20 years without that. It's quite literally shaped my working life of these decades. So to thank CDRA for that, but also for the time, the space and the time to do this writing and to reflect through writing, because in the bureaucratic context, as I think many of our organizational contexts, that's not something to be taken for granted. And this writing process really has shifted my work in the time that I was writing and out of that writing. So deep, deep gratitude for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya. That's so wonderful to have a bit more of a sense of you and already some of your reflections on the work and on our work. So that's, yeah, wonderful, and welcome once more.
So I suddenly realized, I don't know if I said what I do in SANBI now. I think I left that part off.
Cool, tell us what you do.
So for the past nearly seven or 8 years, I'm losing count a bit. My role has been to work on social and organizational learning in SANBI's policy advice division. So it's the part of the organization where all the foundational science and research work interfaces with government more broadly, and with the public in the sense of the public interest. So it's really the externally facing work of SANBI, and yeah, working on our learning process internally, as well as how we engage with the outside world to learn, so that we are able to offer the best policy advice.
Brilliant, thank you. I remember many years ago talking with Tanya about the prospect of having something like a CDRA inside of government or even inside of SANBI, and it's been very wonderful over the years to see this learning function growing inside of the organization. Thanks, Tanya, for telling us that. Okay, so shape of the time we have together. As mentioned at the start, that we've got a bit of a panel discussion, which felt appropriate given the topic that we're going to be exploring. So I want to welcome two very special guests who are going to be joining us today, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. So the first person is Deshni Pillay, who, may I say, Deshni is Tanya's boss.
My big boss. There's another one in between.
That's true. Deshni's the super big boss. Sorry, Deshni. This is a very informal gathering. And Deshni, before you joined us, we were just lamenting the power struggles you've been having. So we're thrilled that you were able to join us today from Pretoria. I'm going to read out Deshni's a little blurb Deshni sent me yesterday, just so you have some sense of what she does. And later on, Deshni, you can also obviously add to the introduction of yourself. Deshni is the Chief Director of Policy Advice and Information Management at SANBI, where Tanya works. She holds an MSc in Biology from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and the Swedish Biodiversity Center. She provides policy advice and support to the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries in South Africa, and leads programs of work on mainstreaming biodiversity and biodiversity information and planning. Deshni is responsible for providing strategic input to enable the implementation of national projects and international multilateral environmental agreements, supporting the management of South Africa's biodiversity assets and ecological infrastructure. And I think that piece of Deshni's biography is interesting for us here today. We are a mixed bunch of people. There are people here who work directly for government. There are many people who work in grassroots development. There are people who work in funded development, and whether it's in environment or in other sectors, and that whole world of project funding, and particularly multilateral project funding, is one that there are many people here today who will have had experience of it. So it's for me really lekker to have, very good to have Deshni here. both for your governmental experience, but also your experience of working in a funded environment, which brings its own rigors. And Deshni is passionate about championing transformation, steering organizational coherence, and building human capital in the biodiversity sector. So I won't say much more now, but when Deshni speaks, she can tell us a little bit more about herself. The other person I'd like to introduce today is Gail Surgener. Gail is sitting in New Zealand, where it is 16 minutes past 11 at night. So it's a really big thank you, Gail, for being with us from another kind of darkness, the darkness of the middle of the night. Gail's also an old friend of CDRA's and of this process that we're involved in. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Gail as well. After many years working in community and social development organizations, Gail joined the Ministry of Social Development in 2004 as an accidental public servant. Okay, so that's got to some echoes with what Tanya said about herself in her introduction. Intending to stay for just 3 months, she stayed more than 7 years working as a developmental practitioner inside the bureaucracy. In 2006, Gail attended a 5-week facilitating development course run by CDRA, and that's where many of us here met Gail in Cape Town. Between 2010 and 2015, Gail attended many workshops by the Proteus Initiative, including at Towerland. And we've got Towerland here today. Sue and Elle are both with us, which is fantastic. And participating in the Masters of Reflective Social Practice with Tanya, so former classmates. For the past 9 years, Gail has been a local government public service at Auckland Council. She led a social innovation team working on social and economic transformation in Auckland's most disadvantaged communities. She recently left this role when she was appointed to a ministerial review panel on the future role of local government in New Zealand. So it's really wonderful to have you here with us, Gail. Thank you. And for being up so late. So what we're going to do is we've got our panel, and I'm going to invite Tanya now just to speak a little bit to partly to the paper that she wrote, but as you know, these workshops are trying to take us also beyond what's written in the papers into the experiences of the authors, and then ultimately to all of our experiences of the topic under consideration. So Tanya is going to speak to her experience and hopefully alert us to some key thoughts from her paper as well. And I've said to everybody, speak 3-4 minutes or so. Then we're going to invite Deshni to share her reflections. And similarly, by then it might be a bit of a response to what Tanya said, but also to bringing her own experience, and particularly I think of leadership inside of one of these big bureaucracies that's nevertheless trying to do things differently. So Deshni, you know, how has it been for you coming into a leadership position in this organization, trying to do the kind of reflective social practice that it's trying to do? And then after Deshni's spoken for sort of also again 3-4 minutes, we'll invite Gail also to reflect on both, you know, being a public servant, but in a very different context. What do you make of what you've heard here in this workshop? Anything you've picked up in your reading, or anything you'd like to share with us from your experience of trying to work in this way in bureaucracy and in government bureaucracy. So that'll keep us together for about another 15 minutes or so. And then we'll break up into small groups, not quite as small as the small groups we've had previously in these workshops. Give you all a bit of time to process what you've heard, and we'll come back for the last half hour or so to a plenary discussion. So that's our shape, and we'll close at 2 o'clock. Before I hand to Tanya, are there any questions or comments from anyone, or can we jump? I think we're good to go. Great. Okay, thank you. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sue. And yeah, just to say that in sharing this paper and another I've been working with in the past year with colleagues, I've really been challenged to articulate what I mean by bureaucracy. which it often comes out as, what are you really so grumpy about, Tanya? And I thought it might be useful to start by sharing some thoughts around that. Sue, you said in your introduction that bureaucracies allow things to happen at scale. And I think for a lot of us who end up in government, that's something that's quite attractive. You can really, if you can make a difference at the level of government, you're having impact at a huge scale. So there is something about scale that shapes the bureaucracy. And what comes with that is a highly structured environment, and one in which those structures are, they're formalized, they're set ways of doing things. And the thing with that is it often becomes rigid and mechanistic. There's often the space to respond to specific contexts, to discern what's needed in a particular moment is lost. And with that kind of structured, formalized, set way of doing things, there's actually an intention to be impersonal, because that allows for fairness. So there's there's good intention in all that constraint. But as I said, what happens is that the capacity to respond is often then limited and constrained, and there's often an emphasis on quantitative measures because we can be sure of them. We can be sure to be fair because there's a number next to it. The other thing about the bureaucracy is that they're very strict vertical lines of accountability and control. So there's little natural impetus or incentive to work across line functions. So the organizations tend to be very strictly kind of different roles are very strictly differentiated, and it's not easy to cross those lines. And so the intention is often to enable control. The best version of it is to ensure accountability. The reality is often that there's a strong emphasis on compliance with systems of administrative procedures that are excessively complicated and rigid. Because as soon as there's a breach of control, it gets met with more control. And I think that's like a lot of what I was writing about in my paper was experiences of that ever-growing tightening. And in South Africa, we've been hit particularly hard with it in the context of corruption. So there've been these tightening controls linked to something that's called consequence management. And it generates fear. And I've felt this in myself, this real fear that if you make a wrong step, there are going to be radical consequences. And I have colleagues else, not in our organization, elsewhere in government that I work with closely, who've seen those consequences play out. And it really erodes trust and relationship. That's the first casualty, and people become scared to move. So the stereotypes of government employees as kind of rigid, unwilling to move, unwilling to take risks. Those things are very real in the current environment. So that's just to give you just some context by way of, it's working in a government institution, what one's up against and what I've been so shocked to meet all these years. And then to say something of our organization in particular is that in some ways, for all the time that I've been part of our division, we haven't been a completely typical bureaucracy. We've had leadership that's been different, and I write of that in my paper. that in fact the first leader of our division worked incredibly organically, and in a way dealt with the bureaucracy by not seeing it, which led to other issues. So and meant that often staff didn't know how we worked because it just happened. So in some ways we've embodied, yeah, both poles, and I think it comes out of a lot of us being, Gail, what you called yourself, accidental public servants. You know, we're in it for the work, and I guess when I think about it now, that's the first thing we've met the bureaucracy with, is this deep intention that's connected to the work, a deeply held sense of what we're trying, the change we're trying to bring in the world. And what we've learned through the reflective work is to intentionally build that together, that picture, so that we often talk about how the administrative tail likes to wag the mandate dog. But we meet that situation with a deep connection to the work and shared vision that we build consciously and keep alive consciously in the organization, so that we're always holding what we're in this for. Because it's so easy, I think all of us know that feeling of being kind of weighed down by the paperwork, the administrative procedures, the endless meetings, that the demands that are made of us to fill in a form, to provide the information, no, provide it differently, sorry, we need it in this way. It's like it's a constant pressure that one's under. So to meet that with to be guided by the intention behind the work and our vision for the work in the world has been really, really important. And the second thing that's emerged from this work, and I'm thinking now particularly of the work that Sue and Al did with us, was an understanding at a very deep level that at its heart, our work is relational. So there's all the content that we work with. They're all the science, they're the maps that we put together out of the science to show people what nature needs to be looked after, where. There are all the guidelines, there's all of that work, but that if we're not working relationally, our work in the world falls flat. It ends up on paper and on websites. It doesn't live. So really working into that, and holding strong that need to connect and relate at a human level, because that's what so easily gets lost in the bureaucracy. The connection to ourselves as human beings, we often start to feel part of this paper pushing machine, to each other as colleagues, and to the nature that we're wanting to take care of, and the work. So paying attention to relationship has been really important for us. And then the third thing is something around quality, paying attention to quality. So because in the bureaucracy tends to standardize things, want to make things the same, to develop set procedures that so often get stuck, is to, by really bringing a focus to quality of engagement. It's not just how many people were in the room, but what's the nature of the conversation that's happening? What is it's not just, did you make a call to that person? What's the quality of the relationship you're cultivating with that person? And it's not just, did a partnership meet or not? Is it that partnerships, there was one phase in our organizational life when the partnerships that we convened were called functional mechanisms. So they literally were seen as part of a machine that was expected to deliver. Another fabulous standard of ours is hectares squared under conservation. So that's how partnerships were seen, and through the work that we've done, we much more see partnerships as a way of being, a way of being in our work in the world. And we pay attention to the quality of engagement that we have in those partnerships and our place as Sandy in that quality, in bringing that quality. So yeah, I don't know if that's, Sue, if that gives enough of a sense of the lay of the land.
Thank you. Just recap for us your three main, because I must confess, also the first one I've lost. I've got responsiveness, relationship, and quality. Is that right?
Yeah, and responsiveness out of intention, connection to intention.
Brilliant. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. What we really had to do, not just comply. Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And maybe just to say that so Deshni, you came into the division that had already done some of this work out of a different part of the organization. And I was so excited when you agreed to participate in this panel, because I would really love to hear how that was for you. I can't imagine it was plain sailing and straightforward.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, Deshni, tell us.
Sure. So thank you, Tanya and Sue. And I see a few friends in on screen. So hi to my friends as well. So when Tanya asked me to be in conversation with her in the webinar, I was like, what are we going to talk about? Because of course, I fall slap bang in this bureaucracy that Tanya has been explaining, has big challenges with. And I love the bureaucracy because it gives us structure, it gives us order, it gives us, it gives us a framework to move from. And that's the space that I came from. So I'm a scientist by training, and I've always ever managed scientists to provide decision support. So we're always looking at tools and products to ensure efficient decision making on how we conserve biodiversity. So it was quite a shock for me personally to move into a division that focuses more on developing relationships and working relationally. In fact, I remember the first day when I got to the division, and we'd set up a meeting with the leadership team, and I had my agenda and all my points, and they immediately told me, so I greeted everybody and I said, well, let's just start with agenda item 1. And then they interrupted me and said, no, we don't, that's not how we work. That's not our practice. We do a check-in first. And I was like, what's this check-in? And so they took me through a 4-hour meeting with an hour of check-in, with each of them actually going through, since their last meeting, what they've done, how their teams are, how they coming here in the, to be with the rest of the team that day, that morning, what were the key things that were on their minds, and what they would like to talk about as a leadership team. So that was my first induction into the BIPA practice. And I have to say, I don't know, Tanya can be the judge of that, but I enjoy, it's very different for me, it doesn't come naturally, but I enjoy it. I quite enjoy having more meaningful and deeper conversations and relationships with our partners, and not just being seen as at the end of the month or end of the quarter, asking for how many hectares have now been conserved, the indicators that we usually use to get all of our, to look at how well we progressed over the month or the quarter. So it's been quite a big challenge for me, but I clearly have embraced it, because I've also joined Sue and Elle at in in their reflective social practitioners course that they're holding with co-hosting with Rhodes University, and I'm really enjoying the course and the different techniques, the different kind of I love the course structure and the work that we're learning. And because I'm allowed to attend the course, I actually have to take it back to our senior managers. So I've been sharing that with the other chief directors in our team as well. So really, yeah, I've embraced it. I've enjoyed it, and I'm hoping that my team is enjoying the way that they've inducted me into their practice. Certainly, it's a very big change. I worked previously at the Parliament of South Africa, so I've always been in this bureaucracy. So I embrace it quite easily, and I have a very strong affinity to structure and bureaucracy because we're working with taxpayers' money, and I always challenge Tanya when she says, "Oh, this bureaucracy." I'm like, the bureaucracy is in place because we're working with taxpayers' money, and we need to be accountable, and there needs to be oversight. So the bureaucracy is there for a reason, and I work quite well with the bureaucracy. Sometimes, yeah, looking at how the policies can help us make the changes. So I've had consequence management done on me because I signed something incorrectly, but I embraced it. It was wrong. I shouldn't have signed it. We had irregular expenditure. And so I got into trouble. I have a warning letter on my personal file, but that is what happens when you abuse taxpayers' money. It's not, it wasn't intentional, but yeah. So I think bureaucracy has its space, but bureaucracy is also there to be challenged. And I think that's how I like to work within this bureaucracy. What else did I want to say? Yeah, bureaucracy, and I touched on the relationship. And I just wanted to touch on the last thing, Tanya, around the quality of conversation. We've certainly seen it in Sanbi, in the way our partners talking about the way we've moved from bringing products and maps and bringing the knowledge products to them and almost imposing it, to now really using the partnerships and developing these relationships and kind of bringing in their knowledge in co-developing products and strategies and yeah, and maps even. So really bringing in other knowledge systems. Usually it was just, what's in the scientific literature. So I think we've certainly changed the way we've worked within the division through the process. Tanya is the one lead practitioner in our division, but she's got a nice little cohort now, a few people in the group that she leads. So there's quite a few of us, and certainly I'm seeing a lot of other senior managers in Sandy quoting BEPA and looking at the way we work and wanting to kind of bring that practice into the way they work within developing their products. So I can pause here. Thanks, Sue.
Amazing. Thank you, Deshni. And yeah, really appreciating particularly that emphasis on the co-production aspect of your work, of creating the policy products, that this qualitative, relational, intentional approach to work doesn't happen just internally as a kind of organizational culture, but it's actually the way in which you're seeking to do your work externally as well. And that emphasis there, really much appreciated. Thank you. I'd like to hand over to Gail now. Yeah, and Gail, hear from you, your reflections, as I said at the start, both on what you've heard now, but also what would you like to bring to us of your experience of working in government, in bureaucracy? Oh, thank you.
Maybe start with just a wee bit of context about government in New Zealand. In the late 80s, early 90s, we went through a big change. The sort of neoliberal new public management took hold very strongly, and New Zealand probably was one of the first countries in the world to really embrace that, and it's still very, very much in place today. And probably summing it up in that it's dominated by markets, management and measurement, and that really put me off ever being a public servant. So the accidental public servant, no, I was quite determined. I was never in my career going to go inside the government, but found myself there in an opportunistic way and took a community mindset into the bureaucracy and maintained that for quite a while, just carrying on as if we weren't really in the bureaucracy. And I gathered a group around me who were like-minded, and paradoxically we became successful and became noticed and encouraged and supported. And I guess I found my way to CDRA because I was trying to understand what we'd sort of stumbled across as a way of working. We were very relational, we were working holistically, but we didn't necessarily understand that consciously. So living systems and working with complexity were things that it seemed like CDRA had a practice in. So as Sue said, I found myself in 2006 in South Africa, and that was a time when I was really deciding, do I want to stay? Sometimes people would say, oh, Gail, you've gone to the dark side. So picking up Tanya's light and dark, it felt like, you know, I'd joined the terrible bureaucracy. And I had an experience with Alan and Sue in the CDRA course where we did a Goethean observation exercise looking through the prism and looking, I mean, they gave us the prisms and just invited us to observe what we saw. And that was a real insight for me, because what I saw was light and dark, and the space where light and dark met were the colours of the rainbow, the vibrant space, or maybe more specifically looking for the colour of magenta. And then I suddenly let go of that I'm in the dark side to actually I'm in the space in between. And if you're in the bureaucracy in the space in between, what I've discovered is that is a vibrant space. That is where you can tap into the real advantages of the bureaucracy, like Tanya and Disney were talking about, that there are resources and levers and access to having an impact, or structures that actually can hold you doing really hard things. So I stopped thinking about the dark side of government and started looking for how to stay in the space in between, or to look for those edges. And also, I guess, looking for the cracks where the light comes in, to connect again with Tanya's paper, that there are those spaces. And I guess I've made a career as a public servant looking for those spaces, and sometimes they close up and I've had to move on because there's only dark, not the light in the dark. And I guess I've learnt over that time too, that it's very much a mindset, how you think about being inside the bureaucracy and through challenging times, trying to hold on to what it is, the purpose for being there, what you're trying to achieve, and how to find or locate yourself in a place where there's still some vibrancy in the system. I mean, I really relate to what's been said about bureaucracies are about managing and controlling, and there is a real focus on straight lines and what's the evidence-based program or service that's going to fix a problem. And I think that way of operating is reaching its limits. I think we're increasingly understanding that with high levels of complexity, that sort of linear mechanistic thinking is not delivering results. So I think we are at a point, well, I'm being an optimist, I guess, that there is a transition where relational approaches, where more that standardization has its place with simple challenges, but not complex challenges. That requires much more of a bespoke quality, to link with what Tanya was saying, approach. And I can see that starting to happen in New Zealand, and I don't know how long it's going to take for that shift to occur. But what I think probably gives me the most hope, and this is my probably last point before we have some conversation, today as part of my role with the panel reviewing the future of local government, we had a really interesting conversation with some Māori thought leaders with an Indigenous worldview about the system of local government, and they were talking about how we need new forms of institution, new forms of democracy that do, and bureaucracy that are relational, that see the kinship relationship with the natural environment, was what they were talking about. And I can see the beginnings of that shift happening. What we've got, though, at the moment is a lot of words and not the capability or the action. So there's a growing knowledge that we need to move in that direction, but a lot of work to do to learn and build the capability to be able to realise that new way of being inside government. And for government, I think the biggest challenge is letting go of that control, trusting partners or others, and tapping into new resources, the standardised, programmised service designed inside the government doesn't tap into the lived experience, the knowledge, the wisdom that, for example, is in abundance in communities. And as our challenges grow, I think, well, I hope that we're on the cusp of some new practice. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Gosh, thank you, Gail. So much richness in that. The space in between. What a powerful metaphor for many of us, even those not directly employed by government, but working in those spaces. And then, of course, the absolute clarity that things have got to change big time. Yeah. So a big thank you to Gail and to Deshni particularly for being with us and stimulating and taking our thinking a little bit further. We've got some questions that we want everyone to think about, and I'm going to just put them in the chat box so you can read them and think about them as we set up the groups. But we thought, and I'm sorry, Gail, this is going to be a bit, I said to Gail we would let her go to sleep after she'd made her input, but I'm going to ask Gail if you've got energy, if you wouldn't mind joining a group. Because I realized as I was listening to you and to Tanya and to Deshni, these are conversations that I think everybody would want to pursue with those of you who've given the input already. So is that okay, Gail? I think I saw you nod. Thank you. Okay, great. Because then what I'm going to do is ask Doug to set up 3 groups. They will be quite big, but it gives us a little bit of time to talk in a slight, in a kind of a, let's call it a slightly smaller plenary. And each of the groups will have either Tanya or Gail or Deshni in that group. And they're not going to, you don't have to, the 3 of you, you don't have to be on the spot any further. But if you could just participate in those group conversations about these questions, you'll see Tanya has prepared some questions. So if you could now even start thinking, having listened to these 3 experiences that have been shared and the themes that have come up, where have you encountered bureaucracy, where it has supported or countered the intention of the organization? And you can see here we're shifting from a narrow focus on government only to bureaucracy in sort of managing and ordering our lives, including through governance, but also other means. And, I mentioned particularly large-scale funding is another place where many of us encounter bureaucracy. So where have you encountered it? Where is it supported the intention of the organization? Where has it countered it? And then where it has supported the intention of the organization, what allowed or enabled this? And I'm thinking of Gail's in between, there's a role here. I've learned a new phrase in some of the work I've been doing with government recently, policy entrepreneurs, where there are government officials, Deshni's smiling, yes, who see themselves as, playing some kind of agents. They're entrepreneurs. They're playing an agent role. They're not simply implementing something they haven't given thought to. Again, Tanya's notion of intention and how that runs through everything. So to what extent are individual leaders actually enabling the best intentions of bureaucracy? And what are some of the other factors that enable accomplishment of the best intentions of bureaucracy? Where in your experience have you encountered things that actually help make it work? And where bureaucracy does counter the intention of the organization, how have you responded to this or worked into the situation? And then finally, is there anything you notice across all your stories, any common threads or stark differences? And that would be in your small group, where you've heard a few other stories, not just Tanya, Deshni, and Gail's. Is there something in common coming up here that we can see? Tanya, is there, before Doug sets us off on the groups, is there anything you'd like to say either by closing of this panel or, sorry, shame you've been called from home, or anything you'd like to tweak on the questions that I've shared with everyone?
No, that sounds good. Thanks, Sue. Sorry, I was just trying to quiet background noise. The joys of home office.
I'll say, shut up. Thank you. Thanks, Ali. Bye-bye. We'll miss you. Okay, so we've got about 10 people in each group, and I'm hoping, Doug, have you got us? Are we ready to go?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. And we'll go for about, sorry.
So Anna's left. Okay?
Yeah, Anna's left and Ali's left. You can put me in a group. And we're going to go for about, I'm going to suggest about half an hour. If you can zoom us back at 25 past the hour, that would be great.
Oops, hold on. Give me a minute. I've just done a change. All right, I think rock and roll. It's,
Great. Have fun, everyone. See you on the other side.
25 minutes, eh? Okay.
30 minutes. Yeah, 25
30 minutes.
past. Yeah,
Okay.
cool. Thank
Good.
you.
Hi, Sylvia. Everything all right?
Thank you, Doug, for bringing us back. There's, I've got a message from Tanya. I was about to say Tanya and I weren't sure who would hold the space, but it's going to be me. So thanks everyone for that engagement. I know I'm sure for all the groups, we were going to such a place. We had such a picture of the whole world, the whole span of the world, from Argentina to Myanmar. And we got Martin's voice in just at the last minute, but I'm sure like all of the others going to very, very interesting places. So we've got about 25 minutes. I'm going to open the space. Whoever would like to speak, please do bring us in and we'll pick up all the threads that we need to. I know we also I've got some apologies, Sue and Al, we might lose if we haven't already lost them. They're heading into the mountains for the night. But yeah. Let's go. Who would like to take us in first? Share something.
Well, I'll kick off.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, we had a really good discussion in our group, I think, and one of the common threads that kind of came out was, yes, we all recognized, as Deshni said, that bureaucracy is important and one needs to have it. It doesn't matter if one works in an NGO, corporate, or within a government department, provide structure to an organization. The key is how making that bureaucracy effective and not inhibiting one's work. So yeah, I think we had some really good discussions around that. I think I said in the beginning, I work for an NGO and we're a very big bureaucracy, and we've become a lot more bureaucratic in the last sort of decade and a half, and I think that's probably since the global economic crisis, as a generative mechanism, which has encouraged, or not encouraged, has put the pressure on government departments, NGOs, and corporates to be more accountable with the money that they spend, as Deshni has said, but to also prove one's value to what one's doing. So I can understand why this is a kind of phenomenon that we're all dealing with. It doesn't matter what sector of society one comes from, but it definitely is inhibiting, I think, innovativeness and trust and relationships. And yeah, our group had quite a bit of discussion around that. And I think the general feeling coming out was that it was important, but it was definitely stifling the passion, the enthusiasm, the interest, the innovativeness of people. And yeah, it's about how can one work with that. As Gail said earlier on, you know, you have light and dark, and I think in all our organizations we have light and dark. So how can we try and work with it and ensure that we have a bureaucracy that actually works and doesn't inhibit us, irrespective of where we work. So I find it really interesting just hearing everybody's views, and it makes me realize I'm not the only one alone that rebels against democracy. That's why I don't work for a corporate or government. I work for an NGO. And I really respect, you know, people like Tanya and Deshni that deal with these bureaucratic structures that they're in, which are bureaucratic for a reason, and government has to be bureaucratic, but it can be quite restrictive and inhibiting. And it's good for people like me that work in the NGO to understand the other side of the fence, so to speak, who are government partners that we work with, you know, in our work. And sometimes I think one can become quite myopic in one's own organization and all one's own troubles, and not realizing that everybody deals with this, whether you work in government or corporates or NGOs. So I find it really, really fascinating, because sometimes I think I'm one of the few people that rebels against democracy and batters my head against the wall and find it inhibiting myself. But I keep having to remind myself that, you know, there are good things about a bureaucracy, and it is essential to have, as long as it is efficient and it works. And that's always an axis of tension, I think, that one's always trying to balance.
Thanks, David. Great. Yeah, international NGO with strong South African presence. Wonderful. Thoughts from others, either if people who were in the group with David, if there's something else that comes up for you, or perhaps one of the other groups.
Yeah, I'll go. I was also in David's group. And what was brought up, what Elle brought up too in that group, was this thing of bringing oneself to the bureaucracy and the intention and the vulnerability of that. And Deshni, that was amazing to hear from you too about that thing of what was it called, this consequence management. So you're constantly on that edge. And that's what I found just riveting around this whole practice of Sanbi and Tanya, and what you brought in there is that space for not just relational space, but to be able to bring oneself in that edgy and vulnerable place to ensure that the bureaucracy doesn't work, that the best of the bureaucratic can come through, and that one is really, which I guess the intention is that accountability. But that it can bring it in a way that it's truly accountable, and it's not an accountability that then people can hide behind, and nobody takes accountable. Nobody wants to take the risk of being the final one being accountable. So yeah, just those practices, again, that question of what are the practices that you create safe and trustworthy spaces and relationships. It's amazing.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, and Liz, maybe just to follow on from you is what really struck me in our conversation is the difference between control and what you're saying, true accountability. And what it asks of us in an organization like ours to let go of control and to remain accountable. And you know, and I say that as a manager. So how do you give staff freedom and remain accountable, as Deshni was saying, for public funds? And what are we accounting for? I think that's often what happens in the bureaucracy. We get confused because we think we end up accounting to very narrow rules and processes instead of accounting for the intention of the organization. And there's something, you know, there's something around that, around the intention of the bureaucracy and the intention of organizational process. You know, and that can go from performance management to to learning process. It's like, what is the intention? That makes quite a big difference, and that allows I guess that allows us to find that space that Gail was talking about between the light and the dark.
Something that I was reminded of in our small group, and it speaks directly to intention, is Nicanor Perlas's work on the 3 archetypes of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity, and the idea that commerce is all, free market is the domain of fraternity, where you offer goods in response to a need as an expression of solidarity or fraternity. That the civil society and the arts is the domain of freedom, where you hoy your freedom. And I think many of us coming out of a civil society background can relate to that. But that government is the domain of equality. And in our group, Khalid spoke about, the idea of the bureaucracy being a trunk. It's structured, it's very strongly structured, but its job is to distribute resources. And it made me think that governance, or even just policies, including of big NGOs, is about equitable distribution of resources, whether those resources are financial or intellectual. And so that thing of intention really kind of gets some teeth for me when I start thinking about bureaucracy. If the intention of say, governance bureaucracy is to provide equitable access, then sometimes you've got to do the same thing over and over again. And I know I could never do it. I don't mean on principle. I mean, literally, I'd forget what the template is. But governance demands sameness, a degree of sameness that is noble, that is good. And sometimes equality trumps freedom. I'm ambivalent about it.
Maybe I can follow on from what you brought, Sue. And I'm facing a huge internal struggle here, because first of all, I think this theme that Tanya brought is so huge. And so, 2 hours is like a drop in this huge ocean. And I loved your paper on the way that you show things outside and also show things inside. So it's huge. And I keep thinking that, and we were in our small group, and I could not even, bring myself again because of this hugeness from all the doors that open from this small conversation, because this deals with everything in our lives. It doesn't deal with, funding or South Africa or government or democracy, or it is involved in everything, in the explicit and the implicit bureaucracies that we tackle all the moment within our lives. Because and the only thing that I wanted to bring, the small, continuation of my thinking that I can share, because there's a lot that's moving on me, is that sometimes I think that bureaucracy is an stated consciousness. And maybe you state this outside in order for you to not to be needing to be sustaining inside your own consciousness. And then this is somewhere that the control and authority and accountability that Tanya brought comes into place. because then you need to control, but you need to control someone to be accountable. And for someone to be accountable, he or she has to have this consciousness within and not from without. And there's a huge clash there. And this is for me very, I cannot go much further than this because I am already very, thorn inside of me. My guts are very torn, my heart is torn, everything, my brain. So sorry if I didn't make much meaning from what I said, but it's so huge. And I want to thank you, Tanya and Dashni. It was amazing to hear you. And Gail, thank you so much for allowing me to know more from you. And it was incredible, our small group as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Patricia. Okay, we've still got some room. I'm also going to invite Dashni and Gail and Tanya to, if you've got any last contributions to make in the next 10 minutes or so, please bring them, maybe reflections on these last 2 hours.
I'd love to respond to Patricia, what you've just brought, because I think you've hit the nail on the head. And that is that this asks of us to bring ourselves from the inside differently. And that's the real challenge. So how do you create safety in organization to do that? It's what Liz spoke about also when she was talking about the vulnerability that it calls for. And it's funny, an image is coming to my mind, actually, Dashni, of you at a recent, relatively large public engagement that we had, where we were in one of the catchments where we're working as part of our Living Catchments project. And and I guess I'm also responding to Liz, where you were saying, what are some of the practices you're working with? And with that engagement, we chose very intentionally to begin by going into the field and looking and engaging with what are the lived realities in this area of work. And the impact was profound. So people who spend most of their lives, their working lives, in an office in Pretoria, were, before we had that space to be, you always have those like headline, keynote inputs. Before any of that, there was none of that kind of buffers us. And we don't think of that as bureaucratic, but it buffers us from the realities of the work that we're trying to do. And before we did any of that, we engaged with those real lived realities, and it really moved people. And Dashni, I'm just remembering you when you gave your presentation on the last day, when we were asking people who work at a policy level, what does this mean for you in your day-to-day work? And Dashni was in tears. And I guess it's like being humbled by the need in our work to in turn touch those situations, to make a difference in the lives of community people who've dug their own trench and installed their own pipe to have access to water, which otherwise just goes to feed the big cities without any regard for the people who are living right next to the water source. So, yeah, I guess it's, yeah, and so yeah, it just brings me back to this question that you're asking, Patricia, around how do we have to bring ourselves from the inside to our work, to be able to, for the bureaucracies to serve a good purpose, whether it be equity, Sue, or anything else. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya.
So I can come in. And
Thanks,
thank you. Yeah, that really, as you were relaying that, I felt how it felt to be standing up there and giving my fancy presentation on what Sanvi's doing. And then, yeah, having that realization that we have all these big plans at a national level. And in the catchment we're working in, the people don't have access to water. So that was the inside outside, like what do you do? You're in the situation where you have to deal with so the policy practitioner, the policy practice at catchment level. So how do you bring that in and relate it to what you're seeing? What I wanted to share from our group was King brought in the importance of creating the spaces for reflection and sharing the reflection. I thought that was really, it actually resonated when she said it. It was important for us to create the space, but also have the vulnerability for us to be able to share and from what is coming out of that reflection. And I think that was the other thing, of course, was Khalid's beautiful tree metaphor. I thought that was amazing. You know, how the importance of the bureaucracy and what throughout the conversation this afternoon, what struck me was we often, and I challenged Tanya on this, we often see bureaucracy as this big suitcase word. And there's so many parts of the bureaucracy, the parts that work, the parts that are that certainly don't work. So the parts that are needed, the parts that stifle innovation. I think that's what David brought in, the parts that are stifling, but then the parts that also, what I take from bureaucracy is that it can also provide, it can open doors if you in the right place within the bureaucracy, and I think that's what I hold on to, because every place that I'm in, as a bureaucrat, I have a responsibility to take, like the people living in the strategic water source area. That's the role and responsibility that I hold as a bureaucrat in the system, is to take the plight of those people into the space, because their voices should be reflected in how I work and the policies that we develop, because I have the power to be able to kind of maneuver in that network. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Deshni. I'm bringing in this thing. It does feel like we're right at the 11th hour, raising so many important topics, and this thing of how to actually be in it, how to be that practitioner, holding all those sometimes competing values or goods. Yeah, it feels very, very present in what you've said. I see, Gail, your mute is off, and it would be great to hear your last thoughts, and then I think we're probably heading to a wrap. Yeah.
Well, two last thoughts. Firstly, to add to what Disney's saying about, I think a key leadership capability inside bureaucracies is to create and hold spaces. And in my experience, it's hold the space, particularly if you're leading a team, for a team to do their work and to feel like they're held. And then you can actually tap into the strengths of the bureaucracy and keep some of the things that constrain innovation at bay. And that's something that I'm keen to try and unpack more. So if people are interested in that, this is going to be a little project of mine. And then lastly, to share a theme from our small group, which was about friendship. And it came up from a number of people talking about how we find our allies in the bureaucracy. They might be in another team. Joe was talking about that, and Rupert talked about finding friends, allies, people to help sustain you in the bureaucracy. And then David talked about helping people change and the role of peer-to-peer coaching. So I feel like the importance of friendship when you're working inside bureaucracies was a powerful theme and a nice note to end on. And I've really enjoyed connecting with old friends like Tanya and my group who I haven't seen for many, many years, and reconnecting with Liz and Tanya and new friends, Patricia and Martin. And there's a very important role of friendship. Thank you, Sue.
Wow. Thank you, Gail. That is amazing. What a beautiful place to I don't even know if it's end, but to pause ever so gently. What the extraordinary themes we've uncovered and such powerful sharing. And I really want to thank Tanya and Gail and Deshni particularly for coming so openly, so humanly. As we've been talking, I've been realizing the black box of bureaucracy, you don't often get insight into it. And here you've been so open. So it's really been an amazing 2 hours, and particularly Deshni and Gail, even extra thank yous for being here and for sharing with us as you have done. I'm going to do a little advert for our next one and then see if there are any last thoughts from anybody else. But next time we meet, it's going to be the 27th of January. Southern Hemisphere would have had a bit of its summer holidays, and some of us with no friends from the north because no airplanes coming in. But yeah, we will have gone through the Christmas break, and we'll meet again 27th of January. I know many of you are signed up for the next one, and that's called the Hesequa Diaries, and it's going to be presented by Rupert, who is here with us. Rubes, you can give us a wave. There you go. There's Rupert. This is going to be a whole other domain. This is taking us right into the grassroots, some of the people that Tanya and Deshni have spoken a little bit about their role as policy advisors and who we're ultimately serving. Rupert's going to be giving us from the inside out insight into working with one tiny community. But the other insight I know we are going to get is from the inside of the practitioner, how it is to work in these situations. So I really look forward to seeing many of you at the end of January. And Doug, thank you for again co-holding, Doug and I holding our online workshop series. Thanks everybody. Is there any last thoughts anyone wants to share or comments to make, information to share before we switch off?
So I'd just like to say a big thank you to you for holding the space, and Doug for your organizing, and Gail to say, and I loved what you brought about friendship. And to say that I guess what sustained me in the organization for all these years has been the friendship, both with my colleagues as well as this broader community of practice that I'm part of.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So much to love in that. See you all next year. Thanks, Kathy. Another rich and thoughtful, thought-evoking conversation indeed. Yeah. Cheers, everybody. Have a good break.
Thanks all, and well done. That was great.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. See you next year.
See you next year. Yeah. Hey, there's Louise.